Right, thank you very much, everyone. I am going to make up the lost minutes. I'm very keen on this. I am going to present a labour of love and a cautionary tale. Back and forth, river crossings at Stirling. This is my youngest daughter, Heather, smiling at the first time in a canoe trip down the Forth that we undertook in COVID lockdown, because we were in the 5 miles. She's smiling because I underestimated just how long it would take to go up the Forth. And what I thought would be 4 hours was closer to 10. And my wife was nearly phoning the police, the etc., etc. Right, so let us crack on. And I note Derek's making notes, so Heather Cook. Right, there we go. So some myths. This is my, I began collecting myths about the Forth. This is my favorite, which appears in 1985. Until well into the modern history, the Carse was largely impassable from south to north, save by tracks known only to natives through the treacherous moss. Merchants, travellers, politicians, and armies were compelled to seek the only main road, paved in parts, and the only bridge. And in order to do so, they had to go right through the town of Stirling, for the moss and marshes washed the very base of its rock. Shite, to be frank. So as John has ably demonstrated, and Richard Tipping, who's not here, there are lots of paths through the bog. What we're really looking at is the historiography. This has focused on the fords of Frew, which carries on to this day. First place above Stirling, where the Forth was fordable, the only firm path through the mosses, and we have lost Professor Brun, but he has echoed the 7 wonders of Scotland. All of this appears in Watson's Magisterial Celtic Place Names of Scotland, 99 years young this year. And he appears to lift that from Scott's Tales of a Grandfather is the first appearance of the Fords of Frew. That poetical alliteration, the rhythm there. The Ford of Frew is a singular point. There are fords at Frew, but there is no fords of Frew. And I'm going to try and unpick some of that and then go on to talk about the reality of river crossings and fortifications. So first of all, worth noting the actual full river basin, the Forth, the Teith, the Goody Water, I don't know why that says the Tay. That should say the Teeth. That must be my autocorrect. That's rather embarrassing. And obviously we have Roy's map there, which was one of my primary sources for mapping the known fords. And here are my other 2 daughters. This is Kirsty, who studies history here at the moment, and Ailey, who is available in Port Street in the Mountain Warehouse shop. At this point, which is about 4 hours into the 4-hour trip, she said that this was the worst day of her life and stopped paddling, which I always thought was a very good positive response to life's troubles. Anyway, moving on. These are the known fords across the river network. All the stars are the fording points. These are on Roy, first edition, second edition, something from the old and new statistical accounts. I do not go past, there is a bigger map that shows Cardross. Cardross is the first non-tidal crossing point on the Forth. Even the Fords of Frew, or the Ford of Frew, I should say, is tidal. The tidal impact extends to Kippen and probably beyond. It's a small tidal surge. So these are the networks of fords combined with the first half of the first millennium AD fortifications, along with the Roman material. So lots of brocks, lots of hill forts, lots of Roman marching camps. That's the known picture. I'm going to expand on this as we go through, because I've spent the last 10 years metal detecting some of the fording points, excavating on some of the enclosures. Another one I want to add, which I'm very excited about, very interested about, this is Manor Powys. This is Stobie's 1787 map. It shows what is called a Roman camp. It's unclear what he means. The same feature is referred to in the old statistical account. There is a manor castle there. The thing to note in terms of its location, the blue arrow here, it sits to the east of the major windings of the Forth, within easy distance of both the Myatt and Abbey Craig, the two key fortifications at the eastern end of the Forth. The other thing to note is that we actually seem to have a natural harbour feature here. There is a dog leg. It is 1.5 meters deep, very substantial. I went swimming there earlier on this year to check it all out. Manor Castle is there. The burns, the little streams there have been culverted to change things. And there is a blocked fossilized stream which contains waterlogged wood, which we are going to get radiocarbon dated, which will appear in the spring. So a very exciting location, quite what any of that means, but the very beginning of the story. You will have noted that my question was, when is the first bridge? Two key facts. Here is the bridge, of course. We heard Neil talking about it, and we've heard about the opposing identities either side of the bridge. There doesn't appear to be a bridge in 1072. William the Conqueror crosses the Forth, which we think is on the, crosses the ford, which we think is on the Forth. We heard about the assizes established in 1180. So presumably the first bridge appears 1072 and 1180. And here's William the Conqueror, just for shits and giggles, really. So moving on. You've seen this map before. You've all seen this map before, the Paris map, which famously has one bridge in the whole of Britain. And this formed another strand to my research. I tried to look at all military engagements from the Romans all the way through. Clearly, the Roman texts are a bit vague about exactly what is happening where, but we have Kenneth II, and apologies, I'm just going to use English names rather than the Gallic, mainly because I can't spell them, let alone pronounce them. So Kenneth II fortifies the fords of Fortin. We have Edward I has spies monitoring fords around Stirling, around the siege of Stirling Castle. Obviously, we know about William Wallace and the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Mary de Guise stations troops at Stirling Bridge to stop it being chopped. Henry VIII has spies monitoring the bridge or mapping the route. Cromwell attempts to cross the Forth in winter, avoiding the bridge, and fears it's too dangerous, so avoids it. Troop measurements to fortify the river crossings in the Glorious Revolution, and lots of detail in 1715 and 1745. The key one of which is General Cope's court-martial papers that said, why were you in Inverness trying to track down Bonnie Prince Charlie when you should just have stayed at Stirling and waited for him to come to you? And a key, and all of that, I think, underlines the significance of the bottleneck, although it has been overplayed. Now, as one goes through these fords, the two most important emerge. The first is the Abbey Ford. This is unnamed and is not referenced officially prior to the Reformation. After the Reformation, it becomes seen as an impediment to river transport, and you have a dozen references to it being readied, i.e. gangs of people from Stirling going down and hacking into it. That's what it looks like at the moment at low tide. It is circa 500 meters long. You can get across the bulk of the Forth at dry tide. There is a late 18th century channel dug into the Cambus Kenneth side. The range of finds, Bronze Age axe, 2,500 BC through to 1500 AD. Coins, we heard Carl talking about the three David I coins, but we also have Roman material late Bronze Age material, early Iron Age material, medieval material, all of which is in various states of publication. Now, I am indebted to Neil in the audience. He came up with a very good idea. Cambus Kenneth, Cambus Gaelic for bend, Kenneth, which Kenneth? In the past, we have thought it might have been Kenneth MacAlpin when he is fighting Picts, but of course we understand that's really all made up. And what we might be looking at is Kenneth II and his fortifying of the fords of Forth, perhaps a possibility. But I would say there is a very good chance that that is probably what might be referred to as Stirling originally. And for those that don't know Thomas Clancy's excellent paper, he refers to the nature of Stirling probably being connected to either the upper navigable point or the lowest crossing point of the Forth. The other option, of course, is Kildene, where the rocks there prevent river transport any further, and you have to take material out, portage over the rocks, and move on. And it is worth noting that there's 4 tons of limestone in one of John's papers are taken to Doon Castle. So potential for Roman transport for the Roman fort there is a possibility. The second one is drip. And again, I am indebted to one of the audience, and Peter here, who will be speaking next. He notes that drip is a debatable zone, perhaps a frontier, and I may come back to that, but I do wonder if we're looking at not just a medieval reference to Earldom of Menteith and the Soak of Stirling, but perhaps to something older and more contentious. This is the same map that you saw earlier, but with more detail. The yellow are the crossing points. The red are the presumed sections of Roman road, Roman coins in red circles, Roman fortifications in red squares. We definitely have a Roman fording point here. We have the Roman fort at Doon. I think the Roman road runs this way, and it runs to the south of the confluence with the Teith and the Forth, mainly so that the volume of water is halved. And there are 18th century references to the ford at Teith, talking at the ford at Drip, rather, talking about 2 feet worth of water. I've swam in both locations. I do a lot of swimming, and I can confirm that the volume of water the other side of the confluence, even in late summer, is enough. I could not swim against the current. Very, very strong current there, whereas by Drip, that is halved. The other thing to note is I just want to come back to that Fords of Forthen. From the 13th century through to the 18th century, Drip is also known as the Fords of Forth, indebted to John for that observation. And I do wonder if that is actually the Fords of Forthen that Kenneth fortifies, a possibility. If we move on, more detail here, the same map that you saw earlier, but with chronology added to this. And that's far too much for a late Saturday afternoon to take on board. But all of these things are associated with radiocarbon dates, fieldwork. What there is, which is perhaps not immediately obvious, is that there are more Roman Iron Age sites round the fords at Frew than the fords at Drip and the Abbey Craig. And I wonder if what we're looking at is a strategic distinction that is made between East and West to do with the installation and construction of the Roman road. That the Roman road changes the military dynamics of this area after the kind of 1st century AD, and that reflects a kind of a pre-existing power structure. You can go that way, you can go that way, but that becomes more important, and obviously that's where Stirling Castle, that's where Cambus Kenneth Abbey is, etc., etc. So a quick look at some of the fortifications. We've been busy digging on. I'm only going to talk about the two big ones, Abbey Craig and Demite. We don't know Abbey Craig's name. Obviously, that's a reference to Cambus Kenneth Abbey. A number of sets of dates there. The first set, by one of Derrick's erstwhile colleagues, did not record the species of the wood. And what this appears to suggest is two phases to the fortification around the third quarter of the first century, first millennium AD, and the final quarter of the first millennium AD. It's likely that we're looking at one event, a destruction event here. Abbey Craig is vitrified. There are up to 3 ramparts. The map there by a daughter of Stirling, Christian McLagan, who noted the secondary rampart in the middle of the 19th century. I think we're looking at a destruction event on this fort. We're probably looking at destruction in the final quarter of the first millennium AD. And just if we're thinking about some of those dates, we're looking at potentially contemporary with the Battle of Dollar, potentially contemporary with the raid from the Britons who burned Dunblane during Kenneth I's reign. Quite interesting how all of that fits together. I'd also like to next turn to Demite. I'm trying to think about Demite. Is Demite the only fort in Scotland that we can directly link to a named person and a named tribe? So the Maithi. We obviously make the case with Traprain, but the name doesn't survive in the Gododin, the Votadini don't survive in the place name. I was mulling that over. We've been digging on Demite for the last wee while. Acknowledge the help of Gordon Noble in Aberdeen. The site is significantly bigger than the Royal Commission mapped it in the 50s. The red dotted line is an external ditch, partly based on natural fissure. To the west of that, there is an arena, a bowl-shaped arena feature. If we pursue the logic of the red dashed line and the ditches, we have an external entrance here. And having dug that earlier on in the spring this year, we found a roughly paved area and an artificial mound to one side. Radiocarbon dates from here, AD 437 to 631, which means that the ditch is dug prior to that, that is charcoal produced within the interior of the fort. So all of that very exciting. And again, for those that know the dates, does this fit with Adamman's, the mention of the Maithi and Adamman's Life of Columba? Is this immediately prior to the expansion of the Northumbrians north of the Forth? Lots of interesting things. A view from the outside. This may take some explaining. The main fort there, my new outer entrance there, my new outer boundary here, and then the bowl-shaped arena here, and then there is another fissure that takes you down to Blair Logie, and I would argue that is the original entrance. That looks a bit like the fissure in Dumbarton Rock as one's going up, perfectly walkable up and down. I've done it a few times, and of course, as you go down to Blair Logie, that is you next to that natural harbour at Manor Powys that I mentioned. Now, the first bridge. A little bit of speculation here. We are going to assume that David comes to the throne in 1124. We've heard about kingdoms being conquered. We've heard about expansion. We have assumed that the Forth is more or less the frontier of Pickland and then Alapa from circa 700 to circa, 1050, 1100, a little unclear. So if one has a frontier on the Forth, one would not wish to have a bridge over it because then the bridge makes invasion easier. And I'd point to Robert the Bruce sacking Stirling Castle after Bannockburn to ensure that no one can control it, and therefore presumably no one can control the fourth crossing. So I don't think there's a bridge in 1124. There is a bridge in 1180. We have the borough, we have the high school, then we get Cambus Kenneth Abbey, founded circa 1140. I think Cambus Kenneth Abbey, if one looks at David's charter about exactly what is granted in land, lots of things, lots of resources, I wonder if David is also granting the church control of the crossing point of the Abbey, the Abbey Ford. Now, while we've heard that David was a saintly individual, we've also heard that he was a highly effective ruler. I cannot see him granting control of this key artery until he has an alternative. The alternative is the bridge. Why is he building the bridge of circa 1140? Obviously, that's because the frontier has been pushed south to the Tweed, further down, and actually he feels content or relaxed enough that Stirling is no longer a frontier location, but in the heart of this newly expanded territory that he controls. So my suggestion is that the bridge is built circa 1140, but the borough seal, the text, which combines the royal wood, the borough, the bridge, etc., reflect this sense of conflicted identities, a kind of a slightly frontier zone, all being bound together with the borough and the bridge. So some conclusions. Lots of river crossings, the two most important, Drip and Cambus Kenneth. And I think I've glossed over that, I do wonder with Drip, if what we're actually looking at is not just a medieval frontier, but we're actually looking at the name given to the frontier between Alapa and Northumberland or Northumbria. Idle speculation, no doubt to be shot down. Fords of Frew, Roman road, early medieval fortifications. I should say that there are other locations for fortifications. Castle Rock, we don't know what's on Castle Rock. We've obviously spoken about Abbey Craig, there's Craigforth. We don't know what's on Craigforth either. The whole interior is quarried away. I also wonder if we might be, if we took a grand step back, are we looking at things moving north and south? I do wonder if Dumaet is British, is a bridgehead into what might become Pickland, and then equally as the castle is a bridgehead into Northumbria from what is Alapa, and then what does that make the Abbey Craig stuck in the middle? But I think we have a fluctuating frontier, and I'd forgotten all about Lennox, and I must reread Lennox, so I'm indebted to Alex for reminding me about what exactly is going on. For those that don't know, the boundary of Lennox is basically 5 miles away, 5-10 miles away on the Earl's Burn, which is coincidentally another good place to have a swim. And I'm finally going to say that the first bridge, I think, is constructed by David after a grant of land, the Abbey Ford to Cambus Kenneth Abbey. That is the end, and I'm going to plug myself and my blog, which appears twice a week, telling you all, updating you all about my adventures and including places to swim. Thank you very much.